Hi guys. Welcome again to Soaring Through Chaos. We've been doing this series of talks with friends about how we can take this opportunity, these difficult times, whether it's difficult from a healthcare perspective, economic perspective, the divisiveness we see around us, the angst that it causes. How can we take these times and actually grow through it? How can we grow to the next level of our evolution? So here's someone I've known over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. Teray, how do you say your name? Garchitorena Kunishi, is that right?
Perfect. Perfect. Yes.
Okay, I'm still learning many languages, but it takes me time.
You nailed it.
I've known Teray for about 5 or 6 years. She called me when I was still the happiness inspirer at Project Happiness and asked me questions about it. So now it's my turn to ask her questions. She's been an inspiration for me because first, she keeps learning new things all the time. And we want to hear from her what she's learned recently. Second, she inspires people even through social media by asking a lot of good questions. That's what she did. That was what you did for me, Teray. When you asked me questions about what this happiness thing was about, it changed my perspective. I went deeper. And I was anyway going to India. So I focused on those questions that you asked. And it helped me to connect with people who are either unhappy because of not having enough economic resources, physical resources, or emotionally feeling difficult times. And I looked at myself too. So thank you for that. So tell us, Teray, about your journey. How did you get into all these things?
Oh my goodness.
You can start anywhere.
What things in particular?
Well, how did you get into the healing practices, mental health, and now into the medical side of things? What was the reason? Did you go through challenges yourself, or was it just a hobby? How did you get into all these things?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's the health portion of my journey, like many people, is based on my own struggles. I had a lot of health problems growing up, and different than the rest of my family. I just had a lot of health problems, sick all the time, hospitalized, and eventually, after being hospitalized and taking all these medications and kind of being in this loop, never-ending loop, it seemed, I discovered that diet was such a powerful force in healing, and it really stunned me that my wonderful, kind, and brilliant doctors never asked about food. And when I changed my diet, it completely changed my my immune system, my health, my energy, everything. And that started me on a path of just looking for what else is not being addressed, what else in medicine is missing, even with the best of intentions. And that, that journey first led me to, a lot of reading, of course, just like many people who are watching, and maybe this has happened to you as well, when you find something that works for you that no one else has been able to show you, even people of authority, it makes you want to learn more. And so that was the path I took. And eventually I became a licensed naturopathic doctor, and then started on this path of natural health. You start to realize that food and clean water and access to clean environment, low stress, I started to realize, all these things are so foundational for health and healing, and it's really something that everyone should have. It's not something that just people who can afford to see a naturopathic doctor should be able to access. And so I started to think bigger in terms of how can all of us have this, and why don't all of us have this, right? Because no herbs, no drugs, no special treatment can beat a healthy environment, a secure life, good food. So anyway, I started thinking beyond that, and it's led me to nursing. Nursing has a very strong public health angle, has a very public health approach. And so, it's just I've just been learning, I've just been asking questions, and, I'm where I am now, still doing my best and still not knowing that much, but trying.
Well, thank you. I forgot. I remember I had marked your name as Dr. Teray Kunishi, and now I remembered why, because you're a naturopathic doctor. And it's interesting that I did a short course on naturopathy and Ayurveda when I was in India the last year. And that has helped me the most during these COVID times,
Hmm.
during the pandemic, because in the absence of any known medicine or vaccine, it's so much easier to boost immunity by changing diet and lifestyle and really going through cleanses and even intermittent fasting and things like that. So we want to learn all about that from you. I'm just I'm a user. I've been helped by these practices. So did you grow up in the United States or did you learn elsewhere? Where did you learn all these things, and how did you evolve into the naturopathy and other things?
I grew up in the Philippines. I was born and raised in the Philippines, and it was while I was still in the Philippines in my, I think it was my early 20s, that I started to explore naturopathic medicine, health and healing. And part of my awakening was working, as a volunteer with agrarian reform beneficiaries who were learning sustainable agriculture. So agrarian reform. So, all the stops along the way, these social, societal pieces. And one of the things that inspired me was, the Philippines had a program called agrarian reform, where large pieces of land, basically monopolies, were broken up and given to tenant farmers to farm so that they could also participate in their own, in their own future as owners, as farmer owners. But it was hard for them because the they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the knowledge. I'll back up because they didn't have the knowledge, but they had lost it because their ancestors did have the knowledge, right? Sustainable agriculture is not something that is newfangled or modern. It's something that our ancestors used to survive, right? I later learned that colonialists actually systematically dismantled the subsistence farmer and their ability to feed themselves, and basically made them poor. This is something I just learned, years after that it's all connected, right? We come in, I was supposedly in a group that was trying to help farmers go back to sustainable agriculture without ever considering at that time what role we were playing as people who were trying to teach people. I don't know, it's this very colonial, there's a lot of mythology that colonialism imparts on us, and one is that we are supposed to save other people who we once oppressed, or generationally oppressed. Anyway, that's a little off topic, but that's how I first learned about sustainable agriculture. I was in the Philippines, then started to learn about it for myself and my own health needs, and then was told by someone to go to Bastyr University, which is a place in Washington State that has sort of systematized naturopathic medicine. Oh, you may hear the sounds of my environment. There was a motorcycle back there. There are schools in the United States that has systematized naturopathic medicine, especially the West tradition, sort of Western herbal tradition. And that's where I got my naturopathic medical training.
That's really nice because I also learned, I spent about 3 years, the last 3 years in India, and now I'm going around to many other places around the world, having lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for more than 25 years. Probably the most important and valuable lesson I learned for the last 2 years is that sustainable lifestyles were common. And for various reasons, it's hard even to explain it. Yes, there were interventions. There are still tribals who live sustainably even without agriculture. They are still like hunter-gatherers in India, in many tribes, where they actually live off of trees and gathering things. It takes time to process them, so it may take 2 days, 3 days to dry them out. And also, you can't just put it in a microwave, for example. But the reality is that they have a very sustainable lifestyle. And we, the so-called reformers or social activists, sometimes do a disservice to them by trying to fix them and bring them to so-called modern organic agricultural methods. They already knew it and they lived quite well. I'm not saying it was perfect. I'm not saying that all the vitamins and minerals and so on. But people have survived for literally tens of thousands of years. So
Mm-hmm.
that brings me to the question, and what you're saying is very relevant given a lot of the divisiveness that we see in society, that some people know more than the others. So how can people during these times deal with that? A lot of people are in fear, and that includes me. There's a lot of concern health wise, wealth wise. A lot of people have lost jobs. We're talking about more than 40 million in the US. So,
Mm-hmm.
what can be done? Now, how would you approach this whole public health problem? And looks like you're getting deeper into public health with studying nursing and all that. What can be done at the
Wow.
individual level as well? I think individual level is very important because people are feeling like there's not much they can do. It's all up to the government
Mm-hmm.
or some other things. But then there's a loss of agency and a feeling of being like a victim. So how can we empower each other?
That's a really good question, and like you, it's something I've asked myself a lot during this time. First with the lockdown, and now when racism is really rearing its ugly head. Not that it's never been there. It's just we're so aware of it now, and we see the intersections. Right, already we knew that with COVID-19, it was people of color who were disproportionately affected and dying. See on TV this man dying just like so many people like him are disproportionately dying. And there is a temptation or a tendency to go into overwhelm and just be in fear, just be in anger, just be in our emotions. And I think on an individual level, it really depends on where you stand, what your perspective, what your background is, because it's different for everyone. Like for that are African American, that are people of color, you have a very different perspective than someone who is an immigrant but is a white passing person, which is what I consider myself to be. Though I'm a person of color, I don't experience the same level of discrimination as other people do. I think it's important to start with that, because we can't assume that everyone has the same baseline, right? So if you have a baseline of, you're unemployed, you've lost your job, or your job is in jeopardy, your income is in jeopardy because of what's happening now, then you have a very different set of priorities, right? You're operating on a different level, and that's fine. Like, you need to do what you need to do to survive, and, have faith in the rest. And with regard to the rest, if, like me, you're in a position where you don't feel, like you're financially in danger. And yet you do feel overwhelmed also because, no matter what your status, you have emotional angst, you have pain. I think I meant financial status. I guess the bottom line is to each, from each according to his ability, from each according to his, from each according to his ability, and to each according to his need, right? So if you're in a position of advantage, if you have privilege, then help those who are not privileged. If you yourself are still struggling, then focus on yourself, right? And let go of the other pieces first. Some people don't have that choice because they must also help themselves as well as others, especially people of color. Um, there's no formula. There's no formula. But I think one of the most important pieces is to be in action.
In fact,
And not.
one of the people on the show said something similar. He said, we are the first person, actually, Siddharth from India. He said, we are all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So the struggle is everywhere, but depending on what kind of a boat you're in, you may feel the effect of the storm differently. So first thing is to empathize and understand where we stand, what is our current situation. Am I in a position first to take care of myself, my friends and family, immediate needs, because that has to happen. And then that self-compassion, compassion towards the immediate loved ones. And then, of course, the next question is, if I am doing fine, how can I help make this a better world? And tell me about your journey, because you've been doing that all along. I see you doing so many different initiatives. Can you tell us a little bit about that? There seems to be either social activist or somebody who has been serving society all along in you. Tell us about your journey.
Well, it probably started when I was a very young child. I grew up in the Philippines under a dictatorial government. The dictator Marcos um, was in power, and my parents were part of the opposition. And so very early on, we learned the lessons of oppression and justice and activism. And so I guess that's always been in me. And there's always a side of me that's looking for the systemic truth. So that's where that comes from. I can't say much more about my journey because I feel like I'm in the thick of it. Like I've arrived anywhere. Um, it's just something that has been bred into me, and I'm grateful for that. But it also, you know, when you're an activist, I think anger is a big part of your emotional signature, and I have that, and that's something I've had to work with. So that's like the personal work, right? Of like how to go from just being angry and outraged um, into reflection, right? Because often, the things we're angry about are also things we participate in. So being really aware of that piece, right? Going kind of always toggling back between like, what's my role in this? What's my part in this? Also, what's the social structure that is allowing either my success or my suffering? And then of like weaving back and forth in that. And I think that's one way to kind of survive in this type of, chaotic time of chaotic situation that we have, this chaotic point in history, is to toggle between self-care and then social care. And that's a lifelong learning.
Wow, you already answered my question to a certain extent. When I first met you, I never could have imagined that there was anger and outrage in you, because that was very much a part of me. I grew up in India, and there were all kinds of challenges, and there still are. It's not over. It's not over anywhere, but the degree matters and the degree differs.
Mm-hmm.
But what you said, I think, has a lot of valuable lessons in it, which is it's very normal to feel outraged, to feel anger, to get disgusted, to feel fear, to feel rage and like want to run away or almost kill someone. So and it's very common also in therapeutic circles to say, oh, these are destructive emotions, somehow tune out of it. But what you're doing, you're going beyond that into sublimating and making use of that outrage. Can you get a little bit deeper into that? What's the process like for you? Because I've gone through this process and I'm still work in progress. How are you able to manage staying calm in the midst of the storm and use these negative emotions in a meaningful way?
That's a
And
really
what
good
can people
question.
do?
Yeah, I think anger and outrage and these sort of strong, fiery emotions have a lot of value, right? Because they can galvanize us into action when in the past we were sort of complacent or, stuck or over intellectualizing. When something sparks our anger, we can get beyond our sort of perfectionist self and move. At least for me, when we saw what happened to George Floyd and all the outcry that was rising up out of it, I felt to that anger and outrage and thinking about my own friends who could very easily be that kind, be in the position of George Floyd. That actually broke me out of a writing block that I had to my, I have an email list and I hadn't written in a long time. And the moment arrived where I said, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get it perfect. I have to say something now. And so that's the power of anger. And that's the power of negative emotions, is they can really push you beyond, at least for me. And I encourage people to use that and embrace that. But anger can only, go so long before it saps you and burns you out and you're exhausted. And then what might come after that is this feeling of, oh, now the emotion or the wave has passed in terms of this, this current wave of emotion may have passed for somebody. Now you get into learning. You can get more cerebral space of, okay, how can I now learn more now that I've woken up? we keep waking up in different ways. It's not an end point, right? It's like, oh, I didn't see this before. Now I see it. I got angry. I said something. And then now, the anger has passed. I've discharged it. But I need to continue to learn, because that thing that awakened the anger in me was a calling. Everything that creates a strong emotion in us can be viewed as a calling for something greater, for something higher. And so, if you feel angry, if you feel afraid that you're not going to do this right, focus on the things that will allow you to be a stronger person. So I'll share a story that I thought was thinking about it a lot, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were really feeling the isolation and being stuck inside, and how frustrating that was, and how that could really harm someone's mental health, for various reasons. I thought of this story that I read long ago. It was, part of a novel, but there was a female protagonist, and she was put in jail. She was in isolation. She was put in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is considered very, very inhumane, right? Because as human beings, we need that contact. And so she was in solitary isolation, but what she chose to do was, in that solitary isolation, was she began to deepen her Tai Chi practice. So
Wow.
morning and night, she did Tai Chi. The motion, in the space that she had, she did. And so when she was released, the prison guard who saw her was amazed, because instead of being sort of physically damaged and emotionally crushed, she was strong, she was whole, she was grounded. And so, whatever situation you're in that's putting pressure on you, that has to damage you, well, that's already what it is. You can't control the outside forces. What you can control is the parts of you that you can develop, that you can deepen, that when you come out of this, you're closer to that person you wanted to be. You're closer to having this.
Yes. In fact, there's always internet connectivity issues, so I'm sure that I will be back. What you told us, Teray, reminded me of Adam Byrne recently mentioned about Viktor Frankl's story during the Second World War and the concentration camp, and how he was able to maintain sanity throughout the entire, being in a Nazi concentration camp. And he wrote this whole theory behind logotherapy, and the work he has done in search of meaning has given a lot of meaning to people. So, Teray, I think we somehow lost you, but we will get you back, and then we'll continue this, okay? Okay, here we are back again. Yes, there's chaos all around us, and there's plenty of chaos in these internet and social media platforms as well, given the bandwidth, everybody is online. So tell us more. We were talking about the story you mentioned about doing Tai Chi while in solitary confinement. And I mentioned after that the story of Viktor Frankl during the Second World War and the Nazi concentration camp. Please continue. So how can we all learn to develop these skills and strengths within during the corona and during crisis times? How can we grow through it?
It's such a good question, and the Viktor Frankl story focuses on meaning. The story that I was talking about, the Tai Chi, is focused on action, but they're really connected, right? So the first question, it may start with meaning, right? So like, what's the significance of this, and what's the point of me living through this? What's the point of me surviving? What's the point of me fighting for a better world? I think that's an important first step. Like, why is it important to you? For everything. We do this in, clinical practice when you want to make changes in your own health. It starts with, why is that important? What are you doing this for? Because doing it because you're supposed to is really not that effective. The brain doesn't work that way. The heart doesn't work that way. If there's no meaning, if there's no significance, if there's no why, then it will rarely take hold. And then beyond the why, you get into action, you get into change, you start doing the things that will bring you towards your why. And I think that's a basic template that any of us can really follow. Another piece I think that's really important is, looking for teachers. Looking for teachers who are walking the path that you believe in, that know a lot more than you, that have the experience that, you're looking for. That's really key, because one of the things that we can easily fall into is just thinking of our own perspective without consideration of other people's perspective. And that can make our actions very unskillful. Not that it's, not that we should be scared of being unskillful, because that's how we learn. But I think, going beyond just our own experience is so key. And we're seeing that now, both, with the coronavirus, where, you have this tension between those who want to wear masks, those who don't want to wear masks, and the reasons behind that. It's like, let's understand why people are so upset about wearing masks. And let's also understand why people want to wear them, depending on which your position is. And now we're in this moment where Black Lives Matter is really affirmed in the validity of its point of view. For some of us, who have the opportunity, who have the emotional capacity to do so, we can begin to educate ourselves and begin to educate maybe our friends, who are not as aware of, the racial struggle, who are not as aware of their own complicity in, in the injustices, really, because we are all complicit to, unless we're, we're all complicit to a certain extent, especially if we are not Black. So learning, being humble and really choosing your teachers, choosing teachers who really truly embody what we want to become.
Wonderful, wonderful. And again, this is exactly why I wanted to talk to you. It's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to find fault with what's going on, how many things are so-called going wrong. But it is important to find meaning in that and to proceed forward in a meaningful, productive way.